What's up, everybody? Welcome to Podcast Now, Back to the Past. I'm Alex, and in this video, I want to look back at Dragon Age Origins, an all-time classic, a game where BioWare was at its peak. I really think, you think 2009, going into Mass Effect 2, or you're getting close, or Mass Effect 3, and Dragon Age just getting off the ground. This was peak BioWare, and, then it gets a little bit more divisive once we get to Mass Effect 3, Dragon Age 2 even, right? Things start to get a little shaky, but this was them full-on cooking. They did an incredible job, I think, with this game. And so we're here to celebrate not just 15 years, because it is the 15-year anniversary, but also as our lead up to Dragon Age the Veilguard, gets closer and closer. I want to look back at all three of these games, Dragon Age 1, 2, and then Inquisition. We're going to try to do all three of those on the channel, all before the Veilguard comes out. It's a tough task, but I'm here to provide for you guys. So I really enjoyed my time going back into this game. This was actually a good old renting game. I tell this story all the time. 2009 was that era. I think to the very early days, and that's actually the year I got my PS3. Get the PS3, getting into like the Batman Arkhams and Prototypes and Uncharted's of the world, and we had a family video at the time, and I would rent as many games as possible because you'd only get games Christmas and then birthday, right? Any other game you got to spend $2, $3, $4, whatever, rent it for 3 nights, see how it is. Dragon Age was one of them. I can safely say I never beat Dragon Age Origins until just now. I played and I knew most of it, if not maybe all of it actually at this point playing catch up, but this is the first time I've actually gone from beginning to end. I have great memories playing it the first time, but I was young, I was 13 years old, just got the PS3, and to keep with tradition, I played this game on PS3. That's a whole thing I want to talk about in this video. The one error with this game is the ability to play it. I actually think Xbox through Game Pass is the best way of playing it. They have the best frame rates. They have the best visuals. And also, maybe that's debatable, but in terms of ease of play, it's easily the easiest. When it comes to PS3, at least my PS3, could not handle the thing. Dragon Age did not run well, and you're going to see that in my gameplay because it's just what happened. The game chugs. Now, maybe it was because I was a mage. I was using spells. There was a lot of effects going on. God forbid I ever called in a thunderstorm because I'd freaking break the game if that happened, but it chugged. And as for PC, I actually did play the first 3 hours of this game on PC before PS3. The game works really well, looks really nice, runs really nice, but you gotta install updates through third-party websites, which was a little iffy, and I did it, and yet my game still crashed over and over and over and over. So in terms of ease, Xbox is the way to go. This is also a game that I think is a prime candidate to get a remake or remaster. Change nothing. Change literally nothing. Just make it run better and make it more accessible. That's really all I ask for, and you already did Mass Effect, now do Dragon Age. In terms of Dragon Age Origins as a whole, though, this game is phenomenal. It really is. And I mean it when I said it earlier. Like, it takes you back to the golden age of BioWare. And I kind of forgot what that was like. You look at the recent BioWare. I get into the Veilguard, kind of info that's coming out. And, I am more of a Mass Effect guy, more of a Mass Effect fan than I am Dragon Age. But it's insane to see just how similar they were. And, you can go further back to, like, KOTOR and stuff. There was a formula that worked really well in the late 2000s. If we're just going to look at like Mass Effect and Dragon Age, right? There's a formula that worked really well in like the late 2000s, and they were firing on all cylinders with this game. In fact, I would say this game kind of cut straight to the chase because it did a lot of like what Mass Effect 1 and 2 did. And if you like combine those experiences, it did a lot of that all in one game. Now, is it lacking in some departments? Yes. Like, you can't push the almost butterfly effect type system. It can only go so far. And you kind of have to like reason with it, level with it, right? Where it's like, okay, 2009, I'm not going to be expecting it. Honestly, because I forgot a lot of like minute by minute like details of this game. I was like unsure what I wanted to do. Do I want to go with Morgan or do I want to go with Leliana? And I actually ended up doing Morgan, and I kind of messed up the relationship thing where I was kind of like flirting with both of them. I didn't really mean to, and that got me in trouble just for a split second, and then I kind of got myself out of the situation. Things are destined to happen no matter what. You're going to get the end thing that, a ritual, let's say, at least to keep it spoiler free for now. You have that happens no matter what, but the relationship that you've had up until that point changes things like a little bit, right? Changes some words. Ultimately, this game has just a great soul, right? It creates an amazing world, and that, I would say, more than anything else, and this is why I like looking back at these games, right? I think 15 years ago, I'm looking back, 2009 was really important to me, not just because it got me into like the PS3 360 era, but they were firing on all cylinders with new properties, new IP. And although we've seen, like, Lord of the Rings comes to mind, Game of Thrones, there's a couple of things that are very close, with the Blight and the Darkspawn. I think Lord of the Rings makes the most, is probably the closest comparison, right? But there are some differences. But I love the lore. Like, the Darkspawn are incredible. They're, number one, actually very, very cool to look at. But just the history there and the Blights and, kind of rallying the troops and getting ready for one final fight, again, hundreds of years later or whatever. The Grey Wardens and all. Like, you think about all of the detail in the classes, and you think about how they made, like, a whole dwarven area, right? And their entire culture. They did the same thing with elves. They did the same thing with mages, with the circle, right? All of this, it's so incredible to think about. And that, I'm playing the game. I'm doing the controls. I'm playing the gameplay. I'm talking to characters. I'm taking a lot of info in, right? But the one thing I take away from this game more now than ever before was appreciation for creating the lore and the world of Dragon Age. I just don't think a lot of those worlds are created nowadays. I think there are new IPs. I think they're not nearly as strong, right? And there's also, I think, just not as many. Again, that's why I go back to 2009, Infamous, Prototype, Brutal Legend, Dragon Age. There's so many 2009 games that were brand new. Batman Arkham, I guess, off of an established IP, but, there was a lot of creativity flowing, in the gaming industry. It's still there. I think it's lesser there now than it was, right? So that, like I was saying, honestly, I was just blown away with. But, the differences even in the beginning, being able to choose your class, and I think having 6 or 7 unique openings. I remember my opening original. I was more of just the noble, kind of human. This time I was a mage. So that entire initiation process and all the stuff you go through in the first hour, really the first hour of each game is different depending on your background and what you choose, which, I knew that you could have different ones. I didn't know how many, and I didn't know just how different they were. Then they all converge, right? And you do the initiation. You go through your thing with Alistair and all that, and then things fall apart, and then you're off into the world. And I mean, like I said, I think the structure of this game is so special, and that's really where BioWare just knew what they were doing. It's got similar themes if you've played Mass Effect games or if you play Dragon Ages, plural. They are structured somewhat the same, right? You think of Mass Effect of kind of rallying the troops as well, right? You're going around to all these different races, and when you go, you're going to have to solve their individual problems. You're put into the world of that race and that situation, and it can get political, it can get emotional, it can get twists and turns. Like there's some things that spring up on you in Dragon Age Origins where you think you know something, right? You think like the good guys are the good guys, and then all of a sudden there's a twist, and it's like, oh, I'm thinking like the werewolf kind of arc, right? Where it's like, that is incredible storytelling, and that's like, oh man, you think you know something, and then the game kind of just turns it on its head, and it's like, hey, it's more complicated than that. That's actually where I very much appreciate the complicatedness, if that's even a word, right, of this game. It does get tripped up in, again, like it can only go so far, and you can at least nowadays, right, you can kind of tell the limitations of the engine with, processing, like a character is going to remember this, or this is going to happen if that happens. There's limits there, and you can see it get, more broad and broad as time goes on, right, where now kind of like anything goes. There might be 5 ways for a situation to happen versus back then there might be 2, right? There's simple things where like a character is going to betray you if you're not close enough to them. Cut, as simple as that, right? Cut and dry. If you're close, they won't do it. If you're not close, they will do it, and that's it. And there's still, that's still intricate. That's intricate enough for me, honestly. Like, I enjoy that kind of stuff, but you look at it and say, oh, this is kind of where that era of these things, of these characters remembering and being able to get into these relationships and all this stuff, that's really where that kind of started. And as a starting point, I think it's incredible. So, we talked a little bit about the lore. I think it's top-notch. The writing and so much of the writing can come down to like details, right? Like a lot of what you hear is establishing the world. So it's kind of the same, right? Like the writing, I think, does a good job of making it detailed enough, making it like digestible, because you don't just want to be hit by facts like all the time, right? I mean, there are a lot of conversations. There's sometimes like if characters are telling stories, it might take like 5 freaking minutes if you're just actually, so I'll read it and then I'll skip. I'll read it and then I'll skip, so I'm not having to wait for the character to talk. But the voice acting in this game is terrific. The characters in general, I think, are actually really, really good. Again, very diverse. Brings me back to that late 2000s era with Mass Effect and Dragon Age. Great characters, all of different backgrounds and races. They each bring something new to the table. They'll each have their own kind of dilemmas, right? You, like I said, you have to go and kind of solve issues, and you're just teleported into these different factions of the world, and you're trying to figure it out and then bring them all together for an epic, large-scale fight, at the end. And that's literally what this game does. And, again, there's twists and turns, and, things go ways that you might not expect. Honestly, my game kind of purposely, also kind of not, fell apart. Like, I lost Alistair at the end. I actually sided with Loghain, and a lot of things happen actually towards the end. Like I said, I romanced Morrigan, which gets you really, really close, and that's kind of heartbreaking, what she springs on you towards the end of it. But maybe I shouldn't have done that, right? Just the differences in how you can play this game. And this is all without, by the way, going into the gameplay. While the game chugs, again, like my experience on PS3 can be summarized by, I think, one word. I would say awful. The actual like gameplay experience is fun, and I like it, and actually works okay on console, by the way, in case you're wondering. Like, PC is totally the preferred place. And again, like, when I originally played it, I played it on PS3. When I played it now, PS3, but I first tried it on PC because I thought I could run it. It is so much better with the layout, right? Like, having the spells like 1 through 10 and, using the keyboard. I can understand why these games probably should be played like that. Honestly, works pretty well with controller. You can still do all the spells that you want. You can control. You can do all your strategies and whatnot. And I mean, that stuff is deep as well. So don't get me wrong. When I say like the experience is awful, it's only because it chugged. It's only because if I got into a fight with more than 2 characters, like if it was an army coming at me and I'm doing a spell, right? I'm about to do like I always use ice, right? It's like, okay, the game is going to run at like 5 frames per second, and you guys are going to see it. Like, it's so unbelievably bad. The game absolutely needs a remake, but if you kind of leave that, on the sidelines for now, the game is incredibly fun. I mentioned all of the different races and backgrounds. Well, with that comes enemy variety and characters. And I mean, you have your cast, you have the people that come with you that you can recruit and let go the majority of, by the way, kind of whenever you feel like it, right? But there's also the side characters and side just things that happen in these environments. And, I would say all but like some of the dwarven stuff, like when you're going down the final part to the dwarf like arc, right, is some of the longest dungeon crawling things I've ever experienced in my life. It was unbelievably long. It got stale. And that does happen from time to time where, it's not the most pretty game. I think the character models look pretty. I think the Darkspawn look pretty. The cutscenes look good, even when you're talking to people. But, when you're running down generic hallway number 1 versus generic hallway number 2, can't really tell the difference. And when you just have, like, honestly, 30, 40 minutes of going down dungeons, and that's all it is, winding roads, you end up finding the same materials that you already have, so it's not really worth looting much. Right? Those are some of the pitfalls, right? So it gets a little too long. But overall, I'd say the pacing is really good. The story missions keep things really well, even the side missions as well. So, like, that pacing is fine, but it's only when they give you a main quest that takes like 2 hours, and most of it is just going down these random dungeons. But I really enjoyed the gameplay because each of these areas do have unique enemies, their kind of own unique situations. I think some of like the bosses, quote unquote, in this game are really, really fun. And that's without really trying. Like, I guess I have a confession. Like, I played this entire game on easy. When I was playing this, I wanted to play it for the story, the characters, the lore. Okay, that's what I was going for. Maybe when I get to Inquisition, because I did play Inquisition, and I can kind of remember it more, I guess, than Dragon Age 1 and 2. Maybe that one I'll play on normal, because it's more of like a balanced thing. But for Dragon Age Origins, it's been so long. I don't play too many games that are like it, so I wanted to kind of coast by. it still takes some strategy. You still have to think. You still have to plan how you're going to be upgrading characters and allocating, different armors. And okay, like if I'm going for Alistair to kind of be like my tank role, you got to make him that way, right? And it's like and he can't be the same necessarily as some other character. I kind of ran with 2 mages, which is acceptable. It might not be preferred, but you can do that, right? 2 mages, rogue, and kind of like a warrior. But you don't have to do that. And that's another thing that I love. Again, I talk about the opening, 6 different openings or whatever it is. You can have so many different play styles. And that's one thing I was thinking about the entire time. Like, I was a more aggressive mage. I use magic, offensively. And there's even characters in this game that use magic defensively, more support role, more healing. And you think about that with any of the classes of characters, and it's like, I played one way. I didn't even use certain characters that came into my party. A lot of the characters I just left on the sideline, had my core 4, and just, went with it. But you think, well, what if I replace them? And then what if even the same characters that I played with, what if I changed their styles and played it completely different? So while I do think the dungeon parts would get kind of stale and kind of boring, I think the replayability, as you might expect for games like this, right, are extremely high. Choosing different outcomes during the big moments, playing with different characters, and you can control them too, right? It's not like you just have to play as one. Playing as different characters, changing up their play style from playthrough 1 to playthrough 2, that is another element in terms of the game itself, right? In terms of playing the game, that is a really excellent part with this game. I think this game excels at those 2 things, right? The lore and storytelling and characters, that and that's a lot of things, but we'll just kind of summarize it into one. And then also the variables that play when you're actually playing it. You can play the same type of role 2 different ways. And then you have all of the allies. You don't have to have certain one. Well, sometimes they lock you in, right? But most times they don't. You can do their own side missions, all that. You don't have to if you don't want. Like, unbelievable replayability and choice-based kind of things in that way. The game's a masterpiece. The game really is one of the better RPGs. Like, there's a reason why it's stood the test of time. And although it runs like complete garbage, the game is still genuinely fun. Again, like, it's because of how I was playing it. I did not enjoy battles as much as I should have, right? And it's only because I was like, okay, I'm ready for the game to borderline freeze on me. And it only crashed once. My game did crash one time on PS3, and that's it. Every other time when the game would go to like 2 frames a second, I had hope that the game wasn't going to crash, and it didn't. So that was around. That did affect, how I thought. But at the same time, I think I've expressed myself, appropriately in this video. Like, I can separate. I can understand, like, I would prefer to play it somewhere else. I probably should have. That's my own fault. But I also think this game should be more accessible, should be easier to look at, should run better, just kind of all across without having to install patches on PC that may or may not work, right? I think we can all agree that the game needs a little, quality of life in that way. But when you look past that, which it's not honestly all that hard to look past, it's an incredibly awesome world that borrows, elements in terms of like, the end of time and these kind of like demon-like creatures, right, that kind of rise from the ground. I mean, it sounds very much like Lord of the Rings, right? And, they come around every so often, and they're somewhat thought as myths, and the world is kind of suffering because of it. So you have to assemble this army, and, kind of with the Grey Wardens, leading the charge, and you fight against them. And, it borrows some stuff, but it's also original kind of in its own way. And then they have to expand, creating all these different classes and these different races, and each of them feel unique. Each of them feel like they're properly put into this complex world that was thoughtfully written and then executed on. They did such a good job, and the gameplay is really good, depending, I guess, on which console you're playing. But again, the replayability there, talking to characters, it's a blast to play this game. I say this a lot for these kind of videos and these kind of games. I'm glad I go back. I'm really glad I go back, because you sometimes forget certain elements. Like, I know this game was good. I knew this game was good, right? But you go back and you kind of appreciate, like, I appreciate again more than ever, just the world. Like, how do you even think of something like this, and how detailed all these different races are? That's something I never really gave them credit for. At least back in 2009, I absolutely did not give them credit for it, right? I remember the opening. I remember that betrayal in the opening. I think the cutscenes are still kind of legendary. That opening fight where like everything kind of goes wrong, right? Like it's freaking epic. It's still epic to this day. It also still looks pretty okay, runs pretty okay, even on PS3. Like I still enjoy those things. Some of the larger scale events in this game are, I think, just as epic as they were, back then. There's not that many of them, and again, it kind of is carried more about the intricacies of the world itself, and that's okay. That's absolutely okay. So let me know what you guys think in the comments. Make sure, as always, you're subscribed to the channel, bell icon turned on. I hope to see you all on the next one.